topic, one that I'm probably most excited about, and I have found to be the most interesting in my research so far. I haven't gotten incredibly deep into it, but today we're going to start Mormonism, which is referred to as the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, and we're going to mostly talk about origins and history, where it comes from today. And next week I am filling in at the 9 o'clock service, so I won't be here to teach the 9 o'clock class, but we will continue. We'll have the room open with coffee, and we'll continue on February 6th. So this right here is a temple in Oakland Hills. There's many of these throughout the country, and they are quite beautiful. As work of architecture and landscaping, it doesn't get much more immaculate than that. Some of you have seen the one in Orlando on Apopka Island. Is that one down Windermere area? Very, very, very beautiful. All right, let's just jump right in and talk about origins. This fellow here, his name, as you might have guessed, is Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith lived a relatively short life from 1805 to 1844. His life ended pretty tragically, as we'll discuss by the end of class today. But he was born on a farm in Vermont, and his family eventually migrated to New York. And one of the things that is interesting and undeniable about the history of Mormonism is Joseph Smith and his family members, especially his dad, and their fascination with finding buried treasure. They really actually believed some kind of myths that there was buried treasure in certain areas, and they used, and I'm going to talk more about this in a few minutes, but they used things like what's called seer stones, and divination and talismans and other forms of ritual magic that they thought would enable them supernaturally to discover buried treasure. So they were after riches, and they were very mystical folks. They were Christian. They were raised like Presbyterian, I think, is kind of what they would have said they were, although Joseph Smith said he kind of identified more with the Methodists. But this is an important part of their history. They were mystics of sorts at heart, or at least by practice. Now, how did Mormonism start? Well, it always starts, cults always begin, as we talked about, with some kind of discontent with the status quo of Christianity. I mean, same with Jehovah's Witnesses, right? This is corrupt, and there's got to be a pure form of this. It is the same with Mormonism. Joseph Smith essentially was bothered by the variety of Christian denominations and practice, and thought, which one is the best? Which one's true? There must be, some of this must be wrong, and some of it must be right, and how do you sort through all of this? And he was a bit disillusioned, and he was at a Christian revival meeting, and he was 14 years old, and he heard the preacher quote from James chapter 1, great verse, and this is the KJV, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." So he thought, well, God's word says that he'll give wisdom if we seek him for it, and so I'm going to seek him for it. So Smith decided he, at this young age of 14, was going to head out into the woods and spend time piously and fervently praying about Christianity, and what path was he supposed to follow. So here's how the story goes. Smith says that it was at this time that he had his first vision. Now there's three major visions that they believe he had that are of utmost importance. And this first one is very foundational to the Mormon faith. So really believing and trusting in this vision as ultimate divine revelation is essential to being a Mormon. But Smith claims that when he was in the woods, he had a vision of two figures who appeared to them. And one he knew was God the Father, and he presented the other one and said, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him, hear him." So much like what Peter, James, and John heard when they were on the Mount of Transfiguration, or what is spoken over Jesus in one of the gospel accounts, baptism, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Okay, so Smith asked these figures then, he said, well, I have a question, which Christian sect is the right one? Which denomination should I join? Which one is true? And he was told by these divine figures appearing to him that he should join none of them, because they were all wrong and corrupt. Okay? And as you might have guessed, they then proceeded to tell him that there was a restoration of the church underway, or that was needed, and that he had been chosen as its leader. How interesting. Okay. So Smith's restoration, what he calls it, is considered by Mormons to be true Christianity. The restoration that comes out of this mystical encounter, this vision, is the birth of Mormonism. It is what is at the core of everything. And so they believe that what the apostles lived out and taught essentially died out after the first generation of apostles and became corrupt. So they do believe in the Bible and they use it like Jehovah's Witness, but again, they think there are some corruptions. I don't think that they have their own translation of the Bible, but they read I think they stick to the King James Version, but they also say that it has to be read alongside the Mormon books like the Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Mormon, and I can't remember the third one, it'll come up. But, so again, they believe early Christianity and what Jesus taught, good, then it got corrupted by men throughout the centuries, and now God has called a visionary and a leader to restore the original Christianity. This is very, very common in cults. I mean, you have essentially this same idea with things all the way up to 20th century movements like David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. I mean, it's always a restoration of true Christianity, right? That's always the story, is that Christianity is too corrupt and perverse and somebody needs to purify it. And usually the way that person purifies it is that they receive new divine revelation. Okay, they get a download from God, and God says, I'm downloading the true revelation of Christianity so you can purify it. I want you to put it, usually he has them, put it in writing of some sort. So with Jehovah's Witness, that was Charles Taze Russell starting his Watchtower publications, or the Morning Herald. And then with, what did we do last? Christian Science was with Mary Baker Eddy writing out her Science and Health with a key to the scriptures, right? So, and then there's many others. So this is similar to that. All right. I thought we'd start off with some fun pictures. There's a lot of paintings that you'd find those pictured in Mormon temples and stuff too, I suppose. So after these visions, Smith continued to be a treasure hunter, and using divination and other things that are very explicitly condemned by the Bible after he received this vision. And Smith was known when we know this through recorded history, that those who were the closest to him kind of thought he was a fraud. He was a guy who said that he had supernatural powers to help people find buried treasure, and so people would hire him from around the country to come and assist them with his supernatural power to find buried treasure. Now, I don't know how many times he was hired and people didn't discover treasure until they started realizing, like, maybe this guy is not what he says he is, but he was seen by those who actually knew him as a bit of a shyster. Again, that's a commonality amongst cult founders. And it is historically true. There's no record of him actually ever finding treasure successfully. So much for that effort. Well, maybe there's some other things I can do with my life, I think Smith thought. Okay. Yes?
What about, like, when people go around and they do the stick with the divine water, is that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, do you mean like people on the beach with the
Divining
rod for water?
What is it? Yes.
What's it called?
A divining rod.
Oh, yeah.
Sit down.
Oh, yeah. Anything like that would be divination, if I understand it right. I mean, that's why it's called a divining rod. And the idea of divination is that through some kind of object, I'm going to talk about this in just that you are, when you, either by gazing at that object or using it with your intentions, some kind of divine knowledge will be downloaded to you or given to you so that you can discover certain things. In some of them have a seeming innocence and silliness to them, but I think really should be avoided and cautioned against. Like, I can remember family members on my wife's side were doing something where you do something with, you're supposed to do something, I can't remember if it's with a pencil or something, to decide if the baby's going to be a boy or a girl or something like that. And I'm like, that's actually divination. You're opening yourself up to the idea that with my with using this ritual, I will somehow, and it had nothing to do with Christ or God, and I thought, that to me, that smells a little bit like divination. I would not do that kind of a thing, even though it kind of seems lighthearted and silly. Now, what Joseph and his father were into was what is known as peepstone gazing, or what we call today seer stones. And so the idea is that there are certain stones that are imbued with divine power, and by gazing into them with intention, you begin to have vision and supernatural revelation of future events, or where buried treasure is hidden, and things like that. So what this makes me think of the most is Lord of the Rings, right? Have you seen the movies? Saruman in the ball that he looks into. What is the ball called? Can anybody remember? I can't remember what it's called. But when Saruman the wizard, who ends up being bad and turning bad, they gaze into this ball, and it reveals things about what's going on throughout the other territories of Mordor and Middle-earth and so forth. Okay, so they were very familiar with this practice. Now, modern-day followers of Joseph Smith and Mormonism, they do, again, just like Jehovah's Witnesses do, they try to kind of separate themselves from this. A lot of them are just ignorant. They're not taught about this part of the history. It's kind of intentionally avoided for obvious reasons, right? Because they do consider themselves Christian people. They wouldn't want to be associated with a founder who was into divination and gazing into seer stones, as far as I understand it. I think there has been some publications that have come out in the last 10 years or so where they admitted that there is evidence that Joseph Smith did use seer stones, and I don't know how they interpreted that. Well, I guess we'll forgive him for his faults or whatever. Okay, there was a case in 1820s, New York versus Joseph Smith, where he was actually ruled guilty of money digging, which is essentially fraud. It's essentially a scheme where you get people to believe what he was teaching, that he had supernatural power, and he was ruled guilty, and I can't remember if he served time in jail or was just fined or something like that. So we know from historical court records that this was a thing, that he was a shyster in this way. This is a picture of like a seer stone, right? So I think a lot of times they'll be chosen because of the design that happens on them. Now, that's a beautiful stone. I'd have that as a decoration in my house, but I wouldn't use it as a seer stone, because the idea is that by gazing into it, you're opening yourself to the divine realm and getting revelation. And I think anytime you do that apart from Christ, you're like opening the gates to whatever is out there floating around in the spiritual realm. All right, another fun picture here. So life goes on, and in 1823, so let's see, he would have been about, he was born in 1805, I'm terrible at math, 17, 18, about 18. He claims that while he was in bed, he had a vision from an angel called Moroni, and this angel appeared at his bed to tell him about some hidden gold plates, and told him where to locate them. They were under a hill near Palmyra, New York, which I think was close to his home, if I remember right. And so, okay, gold plates, interesting. Well, a guy who's always after buried treasure is going to be interested in a divine revelation about gold plates. Now, here's something to think about with all this. Was Joseph Smith a really good liar who knew exactly what he was up to the whole time, felt absolutely compelled for whatever mischievous reason to start a false religion and get people to pay him to find buried treasure, so on and so forth? Was Joseph Smith mentally ill and these are a result of his psychological illness, these visitations and so forth? Or could it be the case, and I don't know, I'm not saying I know the answer, but I think, and I would lean towards this one, that it could be the case that these kinds of things are really demonically inspired. The Bible mentions in the New Testament that Satan can appear as an angel of light, and he will do anything he can to deceive people and take them away from the true Christ and away from the true faith. And I would lean towards that. I don't think Joseph Smith was altogether malevolent-hearted or anything like that. I think he was after riches. I think he was a bit of a fraud. But I think he also did, out of his confusion for Christianity, I think the devil saw an opportunity to deceive him and to get him to deceive others. And for whatever reason, he was particularly vulnerable to that. I'm not saying I know that. There's no way to know. But I think some of these things, he might have really had a vision, but except that it probably wasn't an angel of God. It was a deceiving spirit or something. Okay, so here's how the story goes. What's up with the gold plates? The plates were, now 4 years later, supposedly revealed through 2 reading crystals. So again, we go back to divination and relics and using objects for divination. And he says he was supernaturally provided with these. I don't know if he just woke up and they appeared on his bed or whatever. But sometimes reading crystals, they can kind of look like a pair of like glasses on a stick that you look through to again, just the same idea as the seer stone, to gaze into the heavenlies and see divine revelation. But he was supposedly given these crystals so that when he found the gold plates, there was going to be writing on them that wouldn't be understandable by humans, and he would be able to translate the writings. Okay, so do you think he went after the gold tablets to find them? Yes, and so the story goes. He found the tablets, and he began to translate. He said it was Reformed Egyptian. That was his way of putting it. He claimed that it was hieroglyphics. And this was in for whatever reason, the translation process took place in Pennsylvania. I can't remember the historical reason for his move to Pennsylvania, but he went to Pennsylvania, not Transylvania, to work on this translation. This is yes.
Did he actually find the plates, or did he just...
That's what he says. I don't know if there's any evidence that those plates really exist.
Okay.
This is what he says.
So they're not in a museum somewhere.
Not that I know of. And even if they are, sometimes followers of cult leaders tend to come up with objects that are supposedly the originals, but including Christians sometimes. Now, this is the birth of the Book of Mormon. This is the birth of the Mormonism teachings. Okay, so now there's another fellow that you should know about named Oliver Cowdery, I think is how you say his name, or Coterie. And he was a distant cousin of Smith. I think he was like a third cousin of Smith's mother or something. And he lived with the Smith family or on the same farm or something for quite some time. And he was fascinated with Joseph Smith and the things he was claiming. And he ends up going to Pennsylvania to join him for this translation process. So Cowdery is essentially the first convert to Mormonism, to Joseph Smith's religion. And Cowdery works as the scribe for the translation. So you've got these guys in some room in Pennsylvania, and Joseph Smith is using these reading crystals and reading these hieroglyphics, and then Cowdery is writing everything down that he tells him to write down. Again, this sort of thing, I think this probably really happened, and I think it was demonically inspired. I think these were false teachings meant to be written down to lead many, many people astray, and they have been effective. Now here's where things you really start raising your eyebrows. Smith claimed that John the Baptist was dispatched to Pennsylvania. Okay, and he was dispatched by Peter, James, and John because I don't know why not. I mean, I don't need to be condescending to Mormons, but when you're making stuff up, why not? Why not make fun stuff up? So John the Baptist was dispatched to Pennsylvania by Peter, James, and John on May 15th of 1829 during this process where they're translating, things into the writings of Mormonism. And apparently John the Baptist was there as a divine representative who was going to confer the Aaronic priesthood. Okay, so remember in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's the Aaronic priesthood. That's the origin of the Levitical priests from the tribe of Levi. And John the Baptist comes and he tells Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery that they've been ordained to the Aaronic priesthood. So they are essentially priests, ministers for God. Okay. how convenient that, this was a very private ordination service. There's no evidence that there was this visitation by John the Baptist, but so go the claims. When you think about things like this, comparing them to Christianity, to what we really believe to be true, you'll notice that with these things, there's really a lack of historical evidence on these kind of historical visitations and things like that. Whereas with Christianity, we have so many, countless thousands of early manuscripts and copies of the earliest manuscripts that even secular atheist historians will tell you that it is absolutely absurd to deny the existence of Jesus Christ. And it's absolutely absurd to deny that there were many, many people who followed him and believed that he was God. And there's even archaeological evidence for many other historical biblical figures, right? I mean, we continue. Somebody sent me an article the other day about I can't remember if it was the city of David or something. There was more and more proof coming out through archaeology that the biblical sites described in the Bible were real, and they were around at the time that the Bible claims that they were. And so I just think that, anybody can claim, hey, John the Baptist or Jesus came to visit me in my room and told me that I was to start a new religion. And it's like, well, where's the historical evidence for that? I think that it's lacking. So the Book of Mormon that comes out of this process was published by Smith in 1830s. Now, don't ask me many questions about the Book of Mormon yet, because I haven't jumped into that in depth yet. That'll be what we get more into next time we meet in 2 weeks for the theology of Mormonism. But it was published in 1830. And supposedly, I guess what it is, I've never read it, admittedly. I used to have a copy of it. I don't know what happened to it. I should probably have one. It's supposedly the story of a group of people called the Lost Israelites who were, forgotten about, but they migrated to America in 600 BC, but they were killed in some kind of a battle in the 5th century AD. So the Mormonism tells the story of them, and my guess is that it claims that they are the ones who were, the true people of the true faith and preserved it in their teachings and so forth. I believe that's what I understand it to be. In 1830, now, originally Joseph Mormon referred to his people because he was getting followers through all this, right? As the Church of Christ, but then in 1838 he renamed it the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. And I think that may have been, if I remember right, because some Christian leaders were giving him pushback about that, calling his thing the Church of Christ and pointing out that his teachings did not really line up. But anyway, and they thought he should distinguish his group from the Church of Jesus Christ, the real church. So, we don't have a lot of material left, but we'll see how far we get. So Smith started at this point moving around the country in what seems to be an attempt to establish a community of people who would follow his teachings and live out pure Christianity, the teachings of the Book of Mormon. Well, he moved to several different places. Most of them, I think, were in the Midwest, and he ends up settling in Nauvoo, I don't know how to say that, Illinois. Anybody ever heard of that? I've never heard of it. And he starts a community there, and this is where he institutes polygamy. And he claims that polygamy is justifiable because he claimed that, I don't know where he gets this, but he claimed that Jesus had many wives. Okay, Jesus had many wives, and so I asked the Lord about this, and this was his response when I asked him about it. Oh no, I don't know where you get that kind of thing, right? Sounds like something that you would want to say is true if you wanted to have numerous partners. Okay. I don't know yet about the modern day Mormon position on polygamy. I haven't got that far in my research.
I'm pretty sure
They don't approve of it. Yeah, I think that's what I understand too. Okay. So a few more things, and then we can just have some general discussion about cults and Mormonism. As the Mormon community and its practices became more well known, people were realizing this is a thing and were noticing it. There was an increase of distrust and scorn of Joseph Smith. This is the 19th century. People operated differently. Christianity was very widespread and widely practiced in the U.S. One might even have said that it was somewhat of a Christian nation back then. And so when there were these divergent groups starting to practice and come into view and people were noticing them, that was a big deal. People took umbrage at that and started asking questions and becoming hostile towards it. And there was a number of things where the police got involved with his community, and essentially he was accused of inciting riots because of his teachings. And there was one point when he was arrested and I think served a subpoena but didn't show up. It was something like that. So anyway, he ends up getting arrested and taken to jail along with his brother, who was working with him in a part of his group, in 1844. And sadly and tragically, not long after, there was an angry mob of over 200 people who stormed into the jail, and they brutally murdered both of them. I mean, so this is the kind of scorn and hostility that people had towards him, towards his beliefs about polygamy and whatever. So, I mean, this is almost like Old Testament style, what you do to a false teacher in the community. That's tragic, right? That's obviously not how any true Christian should act towards somebody who is a false teacher. Vengeance belongs to the Lord, not to us. But that was the end and early and tragic demise of Joseph Smith. Again,
Where did that take place? Illinois?
yes,
Illinois.
yeah, in Illinois. So again, I when I think the big picture about all this, I can't get away and escape the idea that this was so orchestrated by the devil. To think even just about the way that his own sad destruction came about before he was able to even possibly realize that he was under deception, the dreams, the visions, the inspired writings, I think it's of demonic origin. And I say that with a compassionate heart towards Mormons, who are in fact very laudable people, as we'll discuss, in a moment. I've got a few things on modern day Mormonism that we can get into. But as you may have guessed, Smith is now, of course, enshrined in Mormon history as a martyr, right? He was martyred because of the true faith. He was a true seer, right? Somebody who was truly a prophet of God and was able to teach the true things. And, that storyline makes sense, right? Because in the Bible, the people who were preaching the truth in the New Testament often became martyrs. And so, of course, they would attribute martyrdom to him as somebody who was one of the true apostles of the true Christian faith that was pure. Okay. I forgot about this part. So there's a little bit more here. So shortly after Smith's death, there was a schism in his followers, and there were those who started a group that was called I don't know if I put it on here, Reformed. They were referred to as the Josephites, and they reassembled in Missouri. They were called the Reformed Church of Jesus Christ, or something like that, of the Latter-day Saints. And they were actually granted, I think by the courts, like the status of true Mormons or something like that. But the group that actually succeeded in carrying things forward were the ones who came under this guy, whose name is Brigham Young. So everybody heard of Brigham Young University? It's the Mormon University in Salt Lake City. And Brigham Young is the one who really took Mormonism to its next step of evolution and growth. And he's the one who led the followers to Utah, and they built Salt Lake City. What I'd be interested to know, and I haven't looked into yet, is what the number of Mormons were at this time. What was the number of membership, so to speak, at this time? And I'm not sure. I'm sure that information is out there. But it was enough for him to have a following and to move out to Utah and to build Salt Lake City, which I've never been there, but from what I can see is quite a beautiful place.
Well, campus is, I've been there, and it is beautiful.
In Brigham Young University, yeah. In Salt Lake City itself seems to be quite a.
You wouldn't like it though. They don't have any coffee or anything with.
So I would have to. I couldn't take much of a vacation there if they didn't have coffee shops.
But you could have a bunch of wives.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you can anymore, but we'll hit on that. Yeah, yeah. Coffee, lots of wives. Okay, so I would choose coffee, of course, and one wife. Mine is enough. Okay, so
Wow.
Mormonism today. We'll get into this for a few minutes. This is the headquarters in Salt Lake City. Isn't that beautiful? Looks like a Christian cathedral, really. And that's a piece of architecture right there.
Wow.
Today there's over 16 million Mormons worldwide. Remember Jehovah's Witnesses? There was 8.5 million. So there's about twice as many. There's about twice as many Mormons. So it's a much, much bigger group in religion than Jehovah's Witnesses is. They're far more. What's that? With all the wives and all the children, right? That's probably why, because you're Mormon by at a very early age. Okay, so there's 16 million of them worldwide. This is the largest new religious movement that comes from the Western world in modern history. Hands down, by far. Now, I mean new. Now, the growth of Pentecostal Christianity would be the biggest growth in any religious movement in the 20th century, but Mormonism is the largest new religious movement. Remember, its foundings are relatively recent, early mid-19th century. And it is the first American-born religion. Born in the USA. It can only be said of that of Mormonism. Every other world religion or recognized religion has its origin in the Near Eastern world or Asia. Okay. The headquarters is, as we discussed, in Salt Lake City, and that is a picture of it right there. Quite a glamorous building.
Is that attached to the university?
I don't know. I have no idea. That's a good question. I would love to do a mission trip there. I know people do that. There are Christians who go there just to engage with Mormons and just to try to share the truth and get to understand them. And they have a big focus on hospitality. They're very kind people, and they welcome dialogue and things, which is laudable considering how some of the other stuff we study, like Jehovah's Witnesses stuff, is kind of like, we'll give you our arguments, and if you argue with us, we're going to ignore that and move on to our next argument, and we don't fellowship with such and such. Mormons are a bit more open-minded and open-hearted. They definitely are not going to receive, Orthodox historic Christianity and its teachings, but they are they believe in generosity and hospitality.
Kathy, BYU is in Provo, Utah.
Oh, not Salt Lake.
It's 15 to 20 miles from Salt Lake itself.
Oh, okay.
What's in Provo?
It's
The headquarters?
BYU.
Oh, BYU's in Provo, right outside of Salt Lake City. Okay. So the organization, they're kind of like Jehovah's Witnesses, but I think they have even more money. Their acquisition of wealth there's some mystery to it, but we know that it's largely through business practices, just through shrewd business practices and through agricultural holdings. So there's another avenue of that income is through media. There's a limit on how many radio stations an organization like that can own, and they own the maximum amount. So they have radio stations, television stations, and all kinds of things. And I'm sure those things are very popular in Salt Lake City. I'm sure that's the locus of it. But they have an enormous amount of money. So just to give you an idea, this was probably, I think this was research that came out of earlier, like maybe 10 years ago. But at that point, the church was taking in about $33 billion in tithing annually. So if you're a Mormon, you tithe, okay? Now, this is laudable. Would that all Christians followed this, right? As a pastor, I can say that, trying to run a church. But $33 billion in tithing. So if you're a Mormon, you give 10% off the top of your income. No questions asked. That's a part of being a Mormon. Everybody gives it. And think about what the Church of Jesus Christ could do if we could all get to that place, right? Because we have more members. If everybody in the world who said they were a Christian, over 2 billion people, 2 to 3 billion people, gave 10%, oh my gosh, the kingdom of God could be doing amazing things. But anyway, so that's just tithing, and then income of, again, this is I think from 2012, this information, about 15 billion in business holdings. Income per year. That's a lot of money. Lot.
They're very diverse then, they're all over the place.
Very, very good stewards of money.
Well, you know, the Mormon Church owns, I've forgotten the name of the ranch or farm. It's includes parts of southeast Orange County and mostly in Brevard County.
Really?
And it's thousands of acres.
Yeah, yes. They do own a lot of land. A lot of land.
The one in Hawaii owns a lot of land, and
The university and, yeah.
Brigham Young.
Yep.
And it's a big piece of land, and it's beautifully kept.
I bet. So again, you know, there's, as I said, there's a lot of things about Mormons that I think are really commendable. Their lifestyle, the way they steward money, even some of the way that they've structured their religion and the things that the accountability that they hold their members to, I think in many ways is a good thing. Sometimes we Christians are almost a little too lax and loosey-goosey with some things we could learn from things like this. Now, they're known for their missionary zeal, right? And you know that they, like Jehovah's Witnesses, go out and about to distribute literature and to engage with people. You often see them in the white dress shirts and the black pants and usually name tags. Any Mormon that I've never had a deep theological conversation with a Mormon, but any brief interaction I've had has always been very pleasant and been very kind. Mormonism has had, this may not be known by all Mormons, but they've had over 125 different factions. That's supposed to say since 1830, not 130. So since the year 1830, when the Book of Mormon was published, there's been over 125 different breakaway groups. So there are little denominations within Mormonism. I don't know what that looks like, but there have been a lot of factions and breakaways and disagreements within it, which is, I guess, to be expected anytime you have a religion or cult that is that extensive in its growth. So here's a few facts. This is where we'll finish out for Mormonism today. Mormons today have a very strong emphasis on education and health. So very commendable things to have an emphasis on. I think Christians should also pay attention to those things. So Brigham Young University that we discussed, which is outside, the main campus is outside Salt Lake City, has over 30,000 residential students, so that's a big school. The Idaho University has at least 20,000, and the Hawaii campus is smaller, but still has over 3,000 residential students. I would pick the Hawaii location if I had to pick if I was a Mormon. There's over, the last time this research was done, which again probably a few years ago, over 700,000 Mormon students enrolled in some kind of seminary or religious training to be leaders, spokespeople, ministers within the Mormon church. So that's quite a bit. They are very diligent about raising up leaders and spokespersons.
And they also have huge families.
Yeah, yes.
More than 4 children.
Yes. There are millions of dollars spent annually to propagate the literature of their, quote, apostles and prophets. And Mormon leaders are powerful in most branches of American government. There are lots of them. They live normal American lives and, for the most part, and get involved in politics and civil things. So you probably recognize this fella who ran for president in 2012, was it? And that's Mitt Romney. He is a Mormon. I think he's an okay guy. Anyway, senator from Massachusetts, right? So,
Governor.
What's that?
He was governor.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Now senator in Utah.
Oh, okay.
He was also like the head of the largest hedge fund, a very big hedge fund.
See, which makes sense, right? The money thing there, yeah.
They didn't do nice things.
Uh-oh. See, I haven't dug that deep. Okay, so today the Mormon Church is led and directed by what they refer to as general authority. So they do have a kind of a hierarchy. It's not just one guy who's like unquestioned and lives in a dark cave somewhere, you know, or a castle surrounded by a guard. There are different groups. The top is called the First Presidency. That's the top tier of authority in the group, and this consists of the top prophet in the organization and his two counselors. I think the guy who I can't remember his name, who is this right now, is in his 90s. So I'm guessing that maybe you hold that role when you're appointed to it until you die, kind of like a pope. And then he has two close counselors to him. And then there is something called a presiding bishopric and a patriarch of the church. So again, you have these different tiers of elders and leaders and prophets and apostles in the church. And then you have two priesthoods within the church. You have the Aaronic priesthood and then the Melchizedek priesthood, which is superior, or which is a higher level of leadership. And just as by way of reminder, in the Bible, these are Old Testament terms. The Aaronic priesthood was the priesthood of the Old Testament priests. They were from the lineage of the tribe of Levi, of the Israelites, and so Aaron and his sons and their successors were the priests of Israel. Melchizedek is a mysterious figure in the Old Testament, and we learn in the New Testament that he is sort of a figure of Christ who holds an eternal priesthood, so you can understand why his priesthood would be considered superior. And almost virtually all Mormon males, I don't know what the exception is, over the age of 12, I think at the age of 12, become Aaronic priests. So if you're a Mormon boy, you are most likely considered a priest. And that just means that you have different ministry roles within the church, within the organization, in teaching and edifying other Mormons. I'm going to try to get a little bit more information about how the priesthood works for our next class. But then at 18, if you've been a worthy steward of the role of being an Aaronic priest, 6 years later, you'll be made a Melchizedek priest, which gives you higher status and authority and influence.
Are these things that are appointed, or do you run for these offices, or do you vote for them?
Good question. I'm not sure what that looks like. I don't think it's just automatic. You have to be ordained. There is some kind of ordination. Okay, they are big on rituals and ceremony and things like that with the priesthood. I don't know exactly what that looks like as far as votes or appointments, right? Yeah, I don't know what the exception is, but I remember in my research it said nearly every Mormon male at turning 12 becomes an Aaronic priest. So it's almost like a bar mitzvah or something. You know, your age and maturity is being acknowledged. Maybe if you're a real hooligan, you don't get to. That's what I'm guessing. The real rebels aren't considered for any priesthood. And then if you're responsible with that, I think at 18 you become. I'm guessing that some of these upper offices decide and review. But maybe this next piece of information will help, even though I don't have a straightforward answer for that. Church administration is divided into wards and stakes. Okay, so we call in the Episcopal Church and in the Catholic Church, we have dioceses, right? A diocese, and that's a geographical region of local churches. So we are part of the Diocese of Central Florida. That's one of 4 Episcopal dioceses in Florida. And then within that diocese, we have, within the Central Florida Diocese, we have what we call 4 deaneries. We have the Northern Deanery, I think there's only 4, the Central Deanery, the East and West Deanery. And those are just ways of breaking up the region. So like there's certain meetings that we have, and it'll be the Central Deanery has a meeting about this, and those are the churches that are in that area. Theirs are called wards and stakes. I think the wards are the smaller of the two, and the stakes are the bigger, like the diocese. But each ward has anywhere from 150 to 500 members, and so that could consist of, I think, numerous meeting spaces and things like that. I haven't dug into researched yet what is church like for a Mormon. What do their gatherings look like? What's required of them? Things like that we'll get into in 2 weeks when we pick back up. I'm going to end there today for the sake of